Today, I'm going to tell you the surprising story of how the Hario V60 became one of the most popular brewers in the whole world, in homes, in cafes. I'm going to argue that one particular company, more than any other, is responsible for making it the most iconic brewer of the specialty coffee movement. Starbucks. Now, that's probably a little bit of a surprise. Starbucks never really used the V60 or promoted it. How could they have made it the most iconic brewer? It's a good question. To answer it, I need to introduce you to another coffee brewer. This one is called the Clover 1S. It's made by the coffee equipment company. You've probably never heard of it, but it's also probably why you own a V60. Now, to make sense of all of this, I'm going to take you back in time, 20 years ago. Now, these were the early days of specialty coffee. The coffee community was small and also spread out all around the world. This meant that trade shows and events were incredibly important, as these were rare opportunities for us to get together and obsess over coffee in the same room. And it was at one of these events that Clover made their public debut.
I believe it was 2005 at Coffee Fest, a big coffee conference in Seattle. And Clover, they set up a warehouse across the street from the convention center. But it wasn't a warehouse. I believe it was a dirt floor. They had like some string lights, some polytarp, and these machines set up in the middle of this warehouse. It was a bit of the buzz around the conference that you've got to go across the street and check out this new machine. And that's where I first saw the Clover and I first met Zander Nosler.
I'm a mechanical engineer and product designer by training. In my consulting career, we did a Starbucks product. We worked on an office coffee machine for Starbucks. It was rough, to put it mildly. And they hired us to help kind of soup it up, dress it up. And in the process of that program, I just felt like I love brewed coffee, and I just was amazed by how underserved the coffee industry was by technology.
The time between 2000 and say 2004, that was espresso explosion. That was all the innovation in espresso, from equipment, from grinders to coffee. That had kind of been done very well. We were finally, I think, as an industry, quite happy. And brewed coffee was on the sideline.
So you've got to remember, in the early 2000s, the specialty coffee movement is really driven by coffee roasters. They're going out and they're sourcing these really small lots of very high quality coffee, way more traceable suddenly. They're building these direct relationships with producers. And the coffees are amazing, but they are perhaps better suited to filter coffee than to espresso. It's easy to forget, but back then filter coffee was incredibly cheap. It's like $1.50 for a cup of coffee from an urn with free refills. Like, people didn't value filter coffee all that much.
When I joined Intelligentsia, the way they made filter coffee was on a Grindmaster urn. They're big machines, they're hot machines. And you know, that was at a time when it was 20 ounces of drip coffee all day long. And the urn could do an awful lot of it.
We were in a tricky situation that we couldn't buy more expensive coffees. And if we did, how were we going to increase then the price of our batch brewed coffees? That was not possible for the people that expected the coffee to stay at the same price. But we, as coffee professionals, coffee geeks, really wanted to taste these coffees. As a business owner, I wanted to sell them, but we had no way of making these coffees until the Clover arrived.
So, in 2005, 3 Stanford grads, Zander Nosler, Randy Hulett and Jura Wire, created the Coffee Equipment Company, on a mission to bring some technology to drip coffee. The first machine they set out to build was a kind of bean-to-cup filter coffee machine, targeted at offices and called the Magnolia. During development, one of the engineers on the team started to mess around with the brewing chamber of the machine and created a new prototype that they called the Chalupa.
It was just like this total like science experiment next to this thing that looked really polished and ready to go. And so we started taking that thing on the road, showing it to people, and we'd show them how the office coffee machine was going to work, but then also make a cup of coffee with the science experiment. Yeah, invariably people loved watching the science experiment, and the cup of coffee was way better too. The feedback was pretty unanimous. Like, people were like, the coffee's amazing, but why are you making an office coffee machine? That's the dumbest thing ever. I can't make coffee this good in my own shop. Why would I try to put it in an office? Can you make me something that would go in the shop?
The office machine was
complicated. It had more systems. It had grinders, it had dosing, it had cleaning. And I think one of the huge unlocks was the CEO of Pete's at the time came in and he's like, why don't you let the barista provide some of the theater and do some of the tasks? Like, it doesn't need to be push button like this office machine you're prototyping. And that all of a sudden took all these systems that were complicated and expensive and unreliable and let a person do them like grinding and dosing and the squeegee scrape that the machine's known for.
So they went back to the lab, re-engineered a new machine from the ashes of the Magnolia. What they ended up with, they called the Clover. So at this point, I should probably explain how this brewer works. It is kind of part of the story too. As a brewer, it's a mixture of immersion and percolation. So it's kind of like an AeroPress, except 500 times more expensive. Now, as a user, at the front end of the control panel, you could choose your desired brew volume, as well as your desired steep time. You could also program the temperature in as well, and then you'd hit go, and the whole thing would start. Now we add some coffee. And the machine adds your desired amount of water, the right temperature. And then there's the opportunity for the first bit of theatre. We have to mix our ground coffee and our water. People were really into their stirring techniques. Which whisk you used? Should it be a bamboo paddle? Should it be something else? What kind of figure of 8 were you drawing on the top of it? It got pretty intense. Now it's going to steep for as long as we want it to steep. And then the kind of separation process will begin. The piston will lift everything up, and then underneath the screen it will pull down, creating a partial vacuum. That will pull the coffee liquid through that fine mesh filter on the top, separating the liquid from the grounds. The liquid will be dispensed, and the ground coffee brought up to the very top, presented to us oh so beautifully. Ta-da! Ready, of course, for you to get your squeegee and squeegee the whole thing clean.
When I saw the demo and tasted the coffee, Zander asked me, would you buy one of these machines? And I said, I would open a store with only these machines.
I spent a summer working in Vancouver because at that time Vancouver was like the place. And I got a job at Wicked Cafe, and that was also not very far at all from Elysian Cafe, where Robert and Alistair ran their business. They had a Clover. That's probably the first time I encountered it.
We bought the first Clover. We were the first cafe in the world to install one of these in a coffee shop.
And I remember coming to Vancouver and just making a beeline for Elysian. They were a multi-roaster cafe, it felt like, before everyone else was a multi-roaster cafe. And the thing I wanted to experience was their menu of filter coffees.
We had then, for the first time, the ability to purchase different coffees from different roasters and sell them at different prices.
So the advantages of the Clover were clear. You can brew and sell a range of coffees, create different experiences, but the machine cost around $9,000 per unit. Could it justify that hefty price tag? Now, one aspect of the industry being smaller back then is that buzz and kind of hype built faster, and the buzz around Clover just exploded.
We would get mobbed at the trade shows. It was definitely like amazing. Like, it would be difficult to get back into our booth if you left it.
There was a certain attraction to visit the coffee shops that had Clovers because you had choices and you had different coffees.
In Silver Lake in Los Angeles, when Intelligentsia opened there, I think they opened with a Clover and they had an urn for the bar. I don't think they ever turned it on.
You know, when you watch someone do a pour over and you're in a hurry, you like dying a little inside because it looks so slow. But for some reason, with the Clovers, it was like the sounds and the up and down, the movement, and, you know, we're turning knobs. You know, you felt like a DJ almost behind the machine.
It was very hip to have a Clover.
But despite all the press, all the hype, all the interest, behind the scenes, the company was starting to struggle.
You could get 500 people at a trade show very, very excited about it, but then, like, in terms of getting the commitments to cut those checks, like, that was where the disconnect was. It was really hard.
I think they had probably more interest than they had business. I remember Zander and his partners being extremely stressed out because they had continued to fund it and they weren't getting into production and getting the traction that they needed.
And I just remember vividly, like, we had to sell 25 machines a month to break even. And we would get to 18 and then 19 and 20, because it was just super hard fought to get each one of those units sold.
The engineering of it was entirely custom. It had a lot of parts. You're dealing with electricity, you're dealing with water delivery, you're dealing with pistons. I have no idea what it cost to make one of those machines, but I don't imagine they were making much money, if not losing lots and lots of money.
Clover are a company on the edge. They may have a solution to a problem, but their target market just doesn't have a ton of cash when they start their businesses. The economy's in a difficult place, and specialty coffee as a whole, it's still a fringe thing. They're running out of money. They're running out of options.
When they sold to that famous coffee company, it was like pulling a rabbit out of a hat.
I should give you some background here, because Starbucks were in a tricky spot, but don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to feel sorry for them. They'd just come through a big kind of controversy around exploitative farming practices from their suppliers in Ethiopia.
And we're out here today to tell Starbucks to honor their commitment to Ethiopian coffee farmers.
And then they had gotten perhaps overly ambitious with their store rollout. They nearly doubled the number of stores, and there were so many Starbucks that they had started to cannibalize their own businesses. And then you've got this new, young, upstart side of the coffee industry starting to kind of boom and explode as well.
I think that they were getting pressed from both ends pretty badly. They were getting pressed from the specialty world. The specialty world was making way better coffee than they were. And they were getting pressed by Dunkin' and McDonald's, who were making way cheaper coffee than they were. They were in that middle place that was, I think, really uncomfortable.
All of this, a difficult economy, meant that in 2007, Starbucks' shares slumped by 42%. One of the worst performing companies listed on the NASDAQ that year. Now, you know Howard Schultz, the man famous for taking that small Seattle-based coffee chain and turning it into the global behemoth that Starbucks was. Well, he'd stepped down as CEO a few years earlier, but he was still involved, still a major shareholder, and as the financial situation inside Starbucks worsened, he returned. In January 2008, Howard Schultz was once again CEO of Starbucks. And 2 months later would be his first shareholders meeting since his return. It would be the chance to unveil his plan to revitalize the whole company. Looking back at the announcements made in the shareholders meeting, you can see that this was a pivotal moment. Howard Schultz announced their new Mastrena espresso machine. He announced the new Starbucks reward card. And for his one more thing, he brought up Zander on stage to brew coffee and to announce that Starbucks had acquired the coffee equipment company and the Clover with it.
And I remember getting back to my seat after the little shtick we did up there, and my phone is like beeping, and it's Matt Lounsbury from Stumptown. His text, "What the f***, Zander?" This is only... Yeah. I was like, oh, what are you going to do, man?
Famously, Dwayne Sorensen, the founder of Stumptown Coffee, on the day of the Starbucks announcement, pulled every single Clover out of all of their shops. He was immediately done with them. In 2008, specialty most definitely saw Starbucks as the enemy. Yes, they had helped raise the minimum price people were willing to pay for a cup of coffee, but they were still seen as being ultimately oppositional to the goals of specialty coffee. And so when Starbucks bought this thing that people were starting to build a kind of new business model around, well, that felt deeply personal.
There were folks on our team who had a real hard time with it, to the point where some were like, I would rather have seen the company die than be bought.
But why had Starbucks bought this company? Was it a smart strategic play? Were they acquiring a technology and a team? Or was it just to spite the specialty coffee industry?
The cynical angle of believing that Starbucks was buying it just to take off the market, I think that's definitely a possibility. But to me, honestly, it felt very aspirational.
I think they believed the business model of making unique signature coffees on the machine.
The Clover sort of threatened and changed the paradigm of what our expectation at a retail level for brewed coffee could be. They were just about to get the next level of sort of almost exponential buy-in from the industry itself and consumers.
And you're right, I think it's to take away this toy that is very irritating, that's taking off in the specialty coffee industry, of the likes of Intelligentsia and other companies that are making a wave with this.
I can be pretty cynical about Starbucks. I'm not really like some sort of diehard loyalist, but I have a hard time buying into the whole they just bought it to take it away. If that's true, show me another example. Do they do this all the time?
In Howard's own words, Clover's quality and beauty were not only thrilling, but posed a very real competitive threat, even at its premium price per cup. So much of a threat that I believe Starbucks needed to own it. Now.
My memory of when Starbucks bought them was remarking at the idea of Howard Schultz going into Grumpy, the Caroline shop in Chelsea, right?
Howard Schultz tells a story about falling in love with the Clover. He goes to New York City, he goes to Cafe Grumpy, he buys a cup of coffee there for $8, and he thinks it's brilliant. It's an amazing, delicious cup of coffee, and at that point, he's in love with the Clover, he's got to have it. This story always bothered me.
Were you surprised to have been mentioned in Howard's story?
Yeah, I was surprised, but you know, I don't know, I wasn't really thinking about it. To me, it's like, who cares? It's Howard Schultz. I don't know, it's Starbucks, I didn't care. Now I'd be like, that's quite like interesting and you know, how cool, but I wasn't there that day. The baristas told me it happened. Some of them didn't know who it was, some did. Someone recognized him and that was all.
I thought the first time he saw the Clover was at the, do you want another anecdote? There was a person who worked at Starbucks who was a personal friend of Randy's, and I get a call from her and she's like, hey, we're wondering if we can get a Clover for a demo for Howard. We'll have a special part of the room and you will come in to do the demo, but you're gonna have to wear a green apron. You're not gonna talk. We're gonna do the talking. And I was like, okay, you know. So we get in there and Howard didn't get that memo. Like, he's like, hi, how are you? You know, and do you work for Starbucks? Like, well, no, actually, I work for the company that made this machine. I made the coffee and he thought it was awesome. And they bought 2 or 3 of them. And then like 2 weeks later, it was in a store or something like that.
I mean, like, to me, like, that is probably more like the first time he saw it.
This inconsistency in Howard's Clover story is actually addressed in one of his books. Having had a great cup of coffee at Grumpy, he gets on the phone to his coffee department to ask what the deal with the machine is. He does note, I did not recall that I had actually seen a Clover brewer in action, tasted its coffee, and met its inventor in mid-2007 as part of a demonstration at Starbucks. So now you're wondering, what's all of this got to do with the V60? It's a good question. In March 2008, the specialty industry now knows that brewing by the cup is a very good thing. It lets you offer a variety of flavors to your customer, a variety of price points too. We want to keep doing that, but we don't want to invest either financially or emotionally in another technical sort of solution to it that a company like Starbucks could just buy away from us.
The decision to get rid of the Clovers happened all at once and seemed to be happening for everyone at the same time. And going back to Earn didn't feel like an option when you couldn't provide the same menu option. And so there was a quick search for what's possible.
A great example of this actually was from January 2008. Blue Bottle Coffee had opened a new location, and at the heart of it, they claimed to have spent $20,000 on a siphon bar. The siphon bar was beautiful, and it certainly drew a crowd, but it wasn't a viable option for most cafes. Some people did consider using a design classic of the pour-over world, the Chemex, but they had a few issues.
Well, because it breaks if you use it in the store. Also, you can't put the cup under it. You need something you could put the cup under that just goes into the cup and you can hand it off.
Then people found the Hario V60.
The V60 was one of many things that were being tried, but it was the quickest and the cheapest sort of point of entry, and one with the most cafe-friendly workflow.
And one of the cafes that really pushed the V60 was Intelligentsia's Monadnock store in Chicago. They had been brewing a lot of coffee by the cup with the Clover and had switched to an all V60 bar and were brewing a huge number of cups every day.
Over a very short period of time, all the Clovers were ripped out and pour-over bars were put in.
After acquisition by Starbucks, everybody were looking for something alternatives, and they found V60.
Now, if you're not familiar with Hario, they're a Japanese company specializing in glassware and things like teapots.
Yeah, before launching the V60, we had some coffee items, but not so many people are interested in coffee items.
In 2005, they launched this, the conical-shaped coffee brewer called the V60 because the angle is 60 degrees. It works in Japan, but outside of Japan upon launch, it doesn't really gain much traction. It isn't until specialty coffee starts to grow and take it with it that it really starts to explode.
Hey guys, it's Will Kest, and I'm here at the Hario booth. I've got the whole next year's worth of products here in front of me.
Everybody asking me, I need V60, I need V60. so yeah, everybody wants V60, yeah.
Something about the V60 just fit perfectly. This was a brewer that was really, really cheap, and I think that really worked in its favor. For a long time, if you were a home enthusiast, you could never aspire to have the quality of equipment that a coffee shop would have. They had really expensive espresso machines, fancy grinders, fancy brewers. You didn't have that at home. But suddenly, coffee shops were brewing with like a $6 pour-over cone, and you had $6, and you could buy a pour-over cone too, and you could be brewing just like them and enjoying the same quality of coffee at home. For that reason, it took off in cafes, but it really exploded going into people's homes. But just how popular is the V60? Hario have sold over 20 million units of the brewer since 2005, and if you stacked them one on top of the other, the pile would be at least 1,500 kilometers tall. It is unquestionably one of the most popular brewers in the world and is an icon of specialty coffee. What I love about telling this story is not just the unintended consequences, which I think are fantastic, but actually this brewer was wildly influential. This really did change the way that people brewed and served and drank filter coffee in coffee shops.
You could argue Clover was responsible for the fascination and adoption with manual brew methods. Batch brew was sort of like intangible and just was the norm. Then you have something crazy exotic and different and techie, just to kind of shift you out of it and then go to something really simple and accessible and varied. It's a nice narrative.
I don't think there would have been the reinvigorated interest in brewed coffee if it weren't for Clover.
And yet, no one's really heard of it. And so I feel like this story really deserved to be told. On that front, I want to say a special thank you to my Patreon supporters who support the channel and allow us to make projects like this. And then to you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.